Hi, friends. Tessa Timberlake here with Soulful Conversations, exploring our inner light. Today, I'm honored to sit down with Gil Hedley, anatomist, teacher, and scholar with a PhD in religious ethics. Gil's work goes beyond traditional dissection. He invites us to see the body as a sacred text, a living story of connection, transformation, and personal freedom. We explore integral anatomy, the beauty of fascia, the reverence of anatomical donors, and the spiritual depth of understanding our own form. And of course, Gil gives us his book recommendations, and we talk about his very interesting superpower. He brings wonder and joy and depth into any conversation. I cannot wait for you to listen to this. It's so good. Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Tessa Timberlake here with Soulful Conversations, exploring our inner light with the amazing Gil Hedley. He's amazing. So I've been following him since 2018, 2019, since my first 200-hour yoga teacher training. He had created this What the Fuzz curriculum that you could find on YouTube, and I was fascinated with the fascia at that time, and so I started following him, and I've been following him ever since. So Gil is a remarkable. He has done remarkable work. He's transformed our understanding of the human body and its deep connection to the spirit. Gil is a pioneering anatomist, teacher, and author renowned for his groundbreaking work in the field of integrative anatomy. His innovative dissections and profound insights into the body's connectedness, there we go, have revolutionized how we approach health, movement, and healing. With over 2 decades of experience, Gil has not only developed a unique approach to teaching anatomy, but has also invited us to explore the intricate web of fascia, connective tissues, in a way that bridges science and spirituality, which is what I love. Through his courses, books, and thought-provoking lectures, he challenges us to embrace the sacredness of how our physical form and see the body as a vessel of connection and transformation, which is, yes, I love that. It's one of my favorite parts about that. So Gil, welcome to Soulful Conversations. And if you
Thank
could
you.
tell
Thank you.
us
Mm-hmm.
what you do and why you do it.
What do? I I follow what feels right
There you
for
go.
for a long time now, and that's different for all of us. And for me, much to my surprise, that has turned out to be a career now spanning over 30 years. I'm afraid, studying our human form in the laboratory. And then reflecting on that, reflecting on the reflections and sharing that with folks near and far. So I started teaching dissection in the lab in 1994, still doing that. I'm going into 2025. And then along the way, I thought, well, it's hard to afford coming to a laboratory class. I should film something so folks could see that. And so I produced a DVD series back in around 2005, and shared that with the world. Eventually online, after I sold it for a few years, I was like, okay, I made enough money off of that, now I'll give it away. And I put it on YouTube and started a YouTube channel. So then that became a place where I could share content as well. And I have over 100 videos up there. And then I started doing tours. And so I started out with the Integral Anatomy Intensive many years ago. I produced that and taught that in various cities. And then I went in 2017, I did a big tour. I went to 46 cities with my What's the Fuzz tour talk to elaborate on this little 5-minute clip that I had put on YouTube that set the world on fire for fascia. And then I spent the rest of my career trying to explain that 5 minutes because folks, get excited about it. But I wanted people to have a much deeper understanding of that. And so I did that tour in 2017 to teach about the different types of fascia, their movement properties, and their role in health. And then I just completed, literally like 2 days ago, our nerve tour, which we did 108 performances, as it were, because it really was a bit of a road show, visually and technically. And so I shared a story of the human nerve tree with the world, and it's been pretty crazy. So I've just finished that. This is the beginning of my so-called break, and I've been working all day, every day since, because there's really no break.
Yes.
I will take a rest, though. In the next 2 weeks, I think Rachel and I will sneak away from the world for a couple of days and ignore our emails.
Y'all need to, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. That was a long haul. It was a long haul to watch. And all of the
I bet it was tiring just to read our emails.
It was, it's inspiring.
Oh,
It's inspiring. So we'll get to the nerve tour for sure. But as we all do, we talk and kind of get unfocused. So I want to ask you this really cool question that I found in a article that Rachel wrote about you, Rachel Scott.
Uh-huh.
And so, how did taking a Tai Chi class create this anatomy passion that you have now?
Well, I think that Tai Chi fell somewhere in the early middle of my anatomy passion, because even as a high schooler, I was enjoying anatomy, and I started doing bodybuilding in the 70s, when I was in high school. And so there was my anatomy growing in front of my eyes. And I was like, that's cool. And so I studied, muscles through Arnold Schwarzenegger's weightlifting program back in the 70s. And when I got to grad school, I did the Tai Chi. And the Tai Chi was a way to sort of get embodied, because after college and grad school, I was pretty disembodied. We were encouraged to be disembodied, encouraged to kind of get out of your body and be like a floating intellect, analyzing the world from a very mental perspective. And that was encouraged. And I felt a little disassociated as a result of it. And so I went into Tai Chi to try and ground my intellect, to try and ground my academic pursuits, to give me more focus. And that really helped. And my Tai Chi teacher one day used the word Rolfing when I complained about some stiffness in my arm, and he put it on a table and jammed his elbow into it and said that this is what Rolfers do. And I was like, really? Well, it hurts like hell, but that helped. So, and I heard that word again a few more times and eventually inquired into it. And during my Tai Chi practice, I was learning hands-on acupressure techniques. It was part of our class. And every single class, we gave each other Tai Chi massages, we called them. And it turned out I had pretty good hands. And so my family, would receive these Tai Chi massages when I went home for Christmas or something, and they were delighted. People would really line up for them. And so I knew I had something going on there. When I learned about Ida Rolf and her life as a healer and a teacher, I felt attracted to that. And it made me want to emulate that life. I thought Jesus was a teacher and a healer, and Ida Rolf was a teacher and a healer. I like that vocation. I think I might be a teacher and a healer if I worked for it. So I went to the Rolf Institute and did the massage training and then the Rolfing training, and all of that raised many questions in my mind that I felt like I had to answer through laboratory study. I thought that was the only way that I could really answer the kind of questions that were growing in my mind, not only with respect to my profession as a Rolfer, but with respect to my own physical issues, because I have my share of physical issues, as do most people who go into healing professions. You're looking ultimately to heal yourself, and if you figure that out, you might be able to help some other people along the way as well. So I went from the Rolfing practice into the laboratory with questions raised in my mind from being a Rolfer, and found myself at home eventually in the lab. And then that became my vocation, was to teach first Rolfers and then massage therapists, and then anybody who told their friend to go to the lab with me. But as mentioned earlier, after several years in the lab, I realized there's more to the world who might be interested in what my work, integral anatomy, than those who can afford or have the time or wherewithal to come to the lab. So I did those DVDs and then the tours, and then I put everything online so people could just study there with me on the cheap.
Okay, so I love anatomy. I've always loved anatomy. I've often thought in my younger years to becoming a massage therapist and just never did it. But when I come to hear this word Rolfing, I didn't know what that meant, and I was surprised at what it was. So please tell the listeners,
Oh,
if
sure.
anyone is out there like me.
So Ida Rolf was a woman. She got her PhD in biochemistry back in the 1920s, and she studied fascia,
Mm.
and then she studied yoga and various other things and osteopathy techniques, and put together a body of work that she called structural integration, to help people become more aligned in their body and more mature in their person. Kind of a double whammy, right? She felt like as you helped a person to let go of their, restrictions in such a way that they could move more fluidly, that they would mature as a person. So around 1968, she got invited out to Esalen by Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt therapy. And she was friends with Fritz, and she went out there and started teaching the massage therapists at Esalen to do her work that she called structural integration, and they called it Rolfing after her, Dr. Rolf. So it's a funny word. When I was practicing as a Rolfer, people would literally think I was doing roofing and call me to get estimates on their roof. But no, it was not roofing, it was Rolfing, and a wonderful form of structural bodywork that since spawned many, many, many teachers and schools doing various versions of structural integration. So it's a hands-on body therapy to help you move better, feel better in your body. And it's quite powerful as an adjuster, because many times the habits that we are living with in our body are reflections of our way of being in the world, right? Of the way that we move through relationships and our social sphere and our work sphere. And so when you start to tweak people's way of being in their body, well, it tweaks their whole life, right? So, fair warning, if you want to go through a Rolfing series, that usually is done in a series of about 10 sessions. You want to go through a Rolfing series, expect things to change in your life, because the patterns that you hold in your body, when altered, will alter the way that people relate to you, the way that you relate to your workplace, your hopes, your dreams, your spouse, etc.
That sounds inner and outer. It sounds
Yes,
yummy.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that
Yeah, you
to me
bet.
and everyone else. So next question is, from training anatomy and then getting into the lab, into exploring people's bodies, right?
Yeah,
How did that connect the dots for me?
yeah. Well, I basically had the good fortune of having PhD at the end of my name after
Hmm.
going through the divinity school of the University of Chicago and studying ethics for 8 years there and 4 years in college. And so I was able to call up the university and say, hello, this is Dr. Hedley, and I represent the anatomy faculty of the Rolf Institute, and my international colleagues are hoping to do a dissection with me, and we thought your laboratory would be a fine place to do that. And the guy called bullshit and said, meet me in my office. And so I met him in his office, and this wonderful man, Roger Faison, we became fast and instant friends. He was the embalmer at the university there in Newark, New Jersey. And he did allow me to work with a cadaver in the laboratory. And I brought a few people in, and we did that. I had very little experience to go by. I had been to the laboratory in Chicago. I had a friend in med school who invited me in numerous times to work with him while he was studying his anatomy. And I was helpful to him because I had studied my anatomy at the Rolfing Institute, and now I was a little ahead of him. So I got my first cadaver experience in Chicago, brought it to New Jersey, invited some people into the lab, and we did a dissection. For sure, it was kind of a disaster in terms of technique. I was just working, I didn't have any guidance, and so I just got myself, a Grant's dissector that the med students used and tried to follow along a little bit. And I thought, this doesn't match. This kind of dissection that they do in these manuals in medical school does not match my sense of the body as a Rolfer, which is very holistic. And I had learned about different layers of fascia that cover the whole body that I had learned to feel with my hands. And I thought, I want to dissect so I can see that. I want to see these whole body continuities, but you can't do that if you're following a regional dissector. And so integral anatomy was born of the tension that I felt in trying to dissect according to regions while already being trained as a Rolfer. It just didn't fit. I had a holistic philosophy and holistic training in my hands, and the dissection style didn't match it. And so the following year, I had the idea to dissect the body in whole body layers rather than by region. And so instead of, say, if you go to med school and, you're day one in the laboratory, they're going to say, okay, find the nerve underneath the trapezius muscle.
Right.
And you're like, really? So yeah, you cut away the skin, the superficial fascia, the deep fascia, you cut the muscle back in half and you look for the nerve. And then the next lab assignment is to go do that in the legs somewhere, and then go do that on the chest wall or something. And before you know it, the body is this higgledy-piggledy cut up disaster. And there's no sense of the continuity. It's a mental projection onto the body that doesn't come from the body. So instead, by dissecting in layers, you're at least following the textures and continuities of the form. You're listening. You have to listen more to the tissue than in regional anatomy, where you just project your mental constructs on top of it. And so when I first brought a few people in to try this with me, and I said, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to dissect the body in layers. We're going to start with the skin. And we reflected the skin and not what was underneath it, just took away that first surface layer. And all of a sudden we saw this giant yellow body underneath it, a whole yellow form. And we were astonished at that. That's not in any books. You cannot find that anywhere. And yet it was a reflection of the way we touch, because we touch that layer and you can feel it across the whole body. Well, then we said, let's take that away now, but not what's underneath it. We took that away, that textural layer, that whole body textural layer. Now the body looked like a big white stocking. We're like, oh my gosh, what is that? What is that big white stocking? And then we're like, what happens if you take that away? And all of a sudden it looked like the muscle chart. Right? All of a sudden, the white stocking was gone, and now it looked like the picture of anatomy that you get in the books. And we're like, oh my gosh, look at that. That's where they live. And then you open to the visceral spaces and like, oh my gosh, they're all together. It's not just a stomach or a pancreas or a liver. They're all together. They're all continuous. And so it was quite a revelation to dissect that way. And basically, after asking my friends at the table, like, do you find this instructive? And they were like, yes, this is very instructive. And so And so I started dissecting with groups that way and doing that in medical school settings and having professors come by and say, whoa, like that's the way dissection ought to be done. They really admired it. Now, they couldn't do it themselves because they had a curriculum to follow that's very entrenched, and there's no shaking that curriculum. So I just developed a curriculum outside of that curriculum. And I can tell you, I've had many professors come and admire this approach and say things like, your students learn more in 6 days than our students learn in the entire semester, because it's so comprehensive and it's so viscerally connected and makes such an impression on you as a person when you see that, because then you can have a relationship with that. And we don't dwell on things either, because in 6 days, how can you dwell on anything, right? And so, the med students, they have to come to that skin and then the next lab again and again and again. And by the end of it, they hate the skin. My students do the whole skin in 1 day and they love it.
Right.
So you end up with this different personal relationship, and this gets to the spiritual part, right? Because it's like, instead of developing an antagonistic relationship with your body, you fall in love with that donor's body, because it keeps teaching you these amazing things day after day during the course of the workshop. And so I used to say that, and I still do, taking that walk through the form in that way, layer by layer, helps you to build that in yourself, right? For having witnessed it and for having touched it, you then have a more integrated feeling of yourself when you walk away from it. Whereas when you do the regional dissection, often you feel kind of discombobulated by it, because it's psychologically disruptive to kind of take the body apart by this way and that way and all higgledy-piggledy. Even if you're doing a good job of it, it still leaves you with a sense of disintegration rather than integration. And so I ended up calling my work integral anatomy, as a counterpoint to regional anatomy. Not to dismiss regional anatomy, but just to stand next to it, like the right brain stands next to the left brain. So integral anatomy stands next to the regional anatomy. And the integral anatomy emphasizes relationships and continuity and whole body textures and the context of everything, to see the big picture and to embody the big picture. Whereas regional anatomy is going to dissect in order to separate things into parts, name them, place those names into taxonomies, and create an ordering of knowledge, which is fine and important and valuable, but you can't stop there. You have to take another step and experience the whole.
Thank you. It just reminds me, I keep seeing visuals of the nerve tour, so I can attest to this, because I was on fire when I came back to my yoga classes, because
awesome.
Well, first off, I got to see the energy centers, like physically see them, as you were holding them, which was, it'll make you cry. It's so beautiful. And then the pineal gland, like I can meditate better, because I know I can feel it inside of my head because I saw it, right? So it's amazing. So back to, I want to mention two things. So a quote, which I find is remarkable: the mental projection onto the body doesn't come from the body. That is just yes, 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 yes. I love that. And I also appreciate how you went to Duke, got a BA in religious studies, and then you went to the divinity school at the University of Chicago and got your master's and your PhD in religious studies, right? And so, well, in religious ethics, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it's like hard right. But in the same sense, all of that is united. All of that is together. Like it's not, oh, I decided not to do that or use that. You're definitely using
No, I was trying to go deep. I was trying to go deeper into it, actually.
Yes.
And I'll tell you how, because when I was, as mentioned at the beginning, there was a very disembodied environment, right? Very mental environment. And I felt illegitimate in as an ethicist. And my focus was very much in family and body issues. I studied Catholic teachings particularly, and and the teachings of the church having to do with family and body life and marriage and this sort of thing. And I'm like, we're doing an awful lot of pontificating about how to live in a body without knowing anything about that body. And it struck me as illegitimate and a scam to do so. I was like, you're just blowing steam there. If you don't know anything about the body and you're telling people how to live in their body, I need to get into my body. Thus the Tai Chi, and then the massage, and then the Rolfing and then the dissection was all just me trying to get into my body after having this very disembodied, disciplined approach to intellectual matters for so many years, getting into my body so that I might find out what it had to say about that moral life. What does the body have to teach us about living in the world, rather than what does our head have to teach the body about how it ought to be, teaching it like some kind of dog or mule or something that'll obey you. There's an incredible amount of intelligence in the human form. And if we pay attention to it a little bit, we might live our lives a little bit differently. We might live a little longer, actually, because the body's rooting for us all the time. It's constantly got our back, and we're constantly betraying its messages in our insistence on living ways according to our minds or according to our dogmas, rather than living according to, as my dear friend Debbie Rosa says, the body's way. Like, what's the body's way of living in the world? And can we learn anything from that, rather than dismissing it or despising it because the physical is somehow less than the spiritual and all of that bullshit? No, I'm way more interested in paying my respects to this divine creation that I can't imagine is not an interesting book to read. I used to say many years ago, if my house was going to burn down, I was going to run out of my house and I had to take, or if there was the end of the world and I had to bring one book into the bunker, what would it be? And I'd always say it would be my Greek Bible. I love my Greek New Testament. And I thought I would bring that because that's like the whole world to me. But after a while, I realized I've got a book right here. My body is a book, and it's a sacred text. And it's all here. You are already carrying the whole story with you. I don't even need my Greek Bible. I can just go it with this body. And if I pay attention to it, the divine voice is speaking here loud and clear.
Loud and clear.
Right?
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. It's yummy. All right. So friends, Gil does explorations of bodies that have been donated to him. And I was fortunate to go to his nerve tour in DC this past fall.
Oh, that's where you went, huh? DC.
Yeah.
That was a fun one. That was quite a space we were in, huh?
Yes. Yeah, it was a beautiful school. It's a beautiful area. It was a good day.
We were at Catholic University in an auditorium there, and it was an auditorium that the Supreme Court justices have meetings in when they have meetings together. So it was quite a fancy room.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it was a pretty room for sure. So Gil has these objects that represent the lives of his donors. And so, Gil, can you explore that topic with me and tell the listeners what that means to you, what that means to them, why you do it?
Do you mean my little shrine there?
Yes, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It made me cry. It's so beautiful.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I always work with a shrine of some sort in the laboratory or on my talks or in my office. I set that up on my desk as a constant reminder, right, of the sacrality of life, and to always remember the meanings are deeper. And when we get caught up in the minutia of our day, and I lift my head and I see my little shrine, I can be reminded, And so on the nerve tour, now the shrine in the lab, I always started out with a little Sacred Heart medal and some tuning forks and a couple of candles. And and then I let it build. I always have my C2 vertebrae there. So our second cervical vertebrae, if you look at it, kind of independent of everything, the spinous process looks like praying hands, and the hands are forming kind of a loop or a circle right around the dens of that pass. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, the dens. Actually, the dens itself is like a tooth, right, on the second cervical vertebrae, and so that's the head, and then the body of the vertebrae is the chest, and then the lamina coming into this process is the arms. And so, if you look at C2 bone, it looks like a little person is praying, and there's like a little prayer happening right beneath your head, at the top of your neck, and it's kind of pointing inside of your cranium. And so I love that bone because to me, it's like St. Paul says in scripture, pray constantly, right? And to me, well, our body is literally formed in prayer, praying constantly within us. And I see that bone, I put a little red Christmas bell inside of it, like a heart. And so that's on my shrine. The tuning forks, they represent our vibrational nature. Basically, we are creatures of frequencies on this planet. All consciousness is different frequencies, right? Different rates of vibration vibrating together, and then we see it as this world. That's how we interpret it. But what we're really doing is transducing the vibrations of this whole world with our nervous system. And then it's an interpretation that we're witnessing. It's not reality that we witness. We witness our interpretation of reality. And we can raise our vibrations and see reality differently. And so I love to have the tuning forks there to remind me of that vibrational nature. I always have a candle burning because to me, flame is alive. It's a living thing. Flame. It's a movement and a transformation of energy. I don't know how else to describe life, but movement and transformation of energy. And so I love candles as life representations, and often hold placeholders for the donor that I'm working with, right? So I light candles for the donors to as a reminder of their life that went before this still form that I'm working on. I have that Sacred Heart there because to me that's the symbol of my whole work, right? Is that kind of overlapping of the sacred and the physical. And I don't see them as separate things. I see them as continuities, right? In other words, if we say on earth, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right?
Yes.
Then what does that look like? Well, that's the divinization of the physical, right? It's the bringing in of the sacred to the dark corners of our world, to its shadows, and filling those shadows with light. So I have that Sacred Heart there to remind me of that. And then as the tour goes on, people see that little shrine and they want to chip in. And it's just like that in my class as well. So I start a class with a tiny little shrine, and by the end of the week, it's a big shrine because people have found a leaf or a flower or an acorn or a funny card or whatever they see that somehow is sacred to them, and then they bring that and add it to it. And that's happened along the tour as well. I've had to clear out the shrine several times on the tour because it got so big I couldn't set it up. And many thanks to all the people who chipped in beautiful crystals and notes and mementos. One thing made it through the whole thing was so small. It was this a little tea bag, the little tag at the end of a tea bag, and it said something to the effect of the heart sees deeper than the eyes. And I thought, oh, that definitely got to go on the shrine. And someone offered that. So the shrine itself is kind of a living, changing thing. If it ever gets too stiff and committed, then it's lost its vibrancy, right? So there's something about spontaneity to truth. And so I like to let things come and go that way. Some things I held on to for a good while, but eventually we let it all go, right? Oh,
yes.
yeah. Well,
It was how do you keep reverence for the body and scientific curiosity of the dissection?
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, they kind of, it goes together.
yeah.
If you keep, I have some very particular ways in the laboratory that I teach folks. For instance, we segregate the material. We'll have more than one donor that we work with at a time, right? And so we're very careful to segregate the tissues, right? So that we keep that donor's tissues as they come off of the body. We gather them, we put them in bags, we label them. They are going to be cremated with the bones. It's all going to go back to the family. So I don't let a scalpel go back to the dirty scalpel tray without the material being cleared off of it so it stays with the donor. And just little practices like that, at the end of the day, I'm down on my knees picking bits off the floor to give that back to that donor. And I make that demonstration so that other folks will pick up on that way of treating and caring for the dead, so that we're conveying a sense of reverence for them without it being a somber sense of reverence, right? Because we're having fun. To my mind, learning about life and the form and having our energies raised is exciting and a celebration, and it's funny, and we have a good time. It's a joyful process, not a somber one. That's my version of reverence, is to be laughing and loving each other and teasing in a playful and encouraging way, so that the whole thing moves along, and that kind of lightness, right, is also a way of being reverent in my mind.
I can attest to that because I often talk about a man that I never knew, and his name was the captain. And
There you go.
it's because Gil, knew him and knew stories about him and honored him.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful day. It was a very interesting day.
Wonderful.
Moving on, you
Mm-hmm.
often ask
Mm-hmm.
throughout periods of conversations, what is my body? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's it has a limitless depth, right? So could you share an example of how our body functions as one unified system, and what can you hope some of us take from that?
Mm. Yeah, what is my body is one of the driving questions of my life, right? Of maybe some other people might find that an interesting question too. And you answer it in different ways along the course of your life. The answer to the question changes, maybe. And I, I haven't found the answer to the question yet. I keep thinking because it's tied to another question, which is, who am I?
Mm.
Right? Who am I and what is my body? To my mind, those questions go together because they're somehow tied together, at least at the moment. But then you die, but I don't believe you die. I don't believe in death. And so one of the things I've taken away from witnessing the body in its incredible physical continuity is that it's possible for there to be a discontinuity between the physical body and who I am. And we all experience that every single night. You go to sleep and you dream and you have a sense of yourself. You have a sense that I am continues, right? You don't think I am not in your dream. You think I am just like you do in the daytime, but you're not doing it with this body. So it's possible for us, even in our lifetime, to experience on a regular basis a discontinuity of our identity with our body. And yet when we wake up, there's this profound continuity that we experience of who we are and our bodies, so much so that if someone says, oh, you're not looking too good, we feel our feelings are hurt, or if someone says, oh, you look amazing, and you don't think you do, you think they're a liar. And we have, so because we are so strongly identifying with our bodies. So, I mean, one of the things that I've learned along the way is that I'm actually not my body, and yet my body is so important. So my body becomes maybe a school, or a learning strategy, or a way of being in the world that I'm conscious is not the only way of being in the world. Now, people who think that way will give up their body. In other words, they'll donate it in advance, right? You have to, right? I've always admired body donors because they realize that at some point they don't need this thing and they'd like someone else to benefit from it besides them. That's kind of remarkable as a spiritual stance in the world. Not everybody gets there, right? Because not everybody gets to a point where they could say, there's a point where I could not need my body. Like, how could that be, right? How could that be? So, now diving into the body is like, I mean, have you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Have you ever if it's one thing to see a picture of it, it's another thing to stand there. And when you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon, I mean, you got to be a tough nut to not feel awe, right? To feel awe and wonder and some kind of uplifting exhilaration at witnessing beauty of that level of intensity. I have found the touring inside the body to be just like that. So there's some fear when you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon too. You think, I could die here. And people do, right? And it's not unlike standing at the edge of the table with a cadaver on it. You think, I could die. And now we're going to fall into this thing. And in a sense, we do die because we look into this crazy funhouse mirror of the body and see ourselves in different ways. And as we see ourselves in different ways, those old ways that we've become habituated to seeing of yourselves get challenged, right? They die. Or the way that you thought you knew anatomy gets crushed. You realize it was just a bunch of words or a bunch of ideas that don't necessarily play out here in the form the way you imagine they would. And so a lot of dying happens in the lab, dying of notions and dying of ways of seeing yourself and dying of ways of seeing others. And I find that people start to see each other with greater appreciation for having been into the lab and realizing, oh, they have that beauty and complexity within them too. And they're not just easily summed up with some reference point that I judged them with. There's more to all of us. And so I don't know, I'm totally wandering now. I don't even remember what your question was, but hopefully I hit on it a little bit.
I think you did. All right. Emphasizing the connection between the body and the spirit, how do you see an anatomical knowledge contribute to spiritual growth?
Oh, I'll tell you, you go into the lab and you've studied your book anatomy, right? Maybe had your hands on some people and projected that book anatomy onto the people, right? And that book anatomy is regional anatomy. It's chopped the body up into a bunch of parts. You know the name of this muscle and that organ and this organ, this fascia, that fascia, etc. And then you show up at the body with your scalpel there and your gloved hands, and you start to do the work. And you're like, what's all this other stuff? Right? And there's all this other stuff there that isn't drawn in the book. And you're like, and your world is crashing down around you because we spent all the way till Wednesday morning before we even, we still haven't seen a muscle yet, right? It's not till going into that third day you start to see some muscle. She was like, wow, I had this crazy abstract vision of the body, and now there's all this context, right? Now there's all this other tissue. There's all this other stuff that I have to account for now. I can't pretend it's not there anymore. Well, that's a spiritual movement for starters. When you realize that you're
spiritual movement,
being
there and watching all of it.
So that's step one. Step two is you start to differentiate the tissue, right? Say you're down at that muscle layer and you're moving your hands into it, and you can use your fingers and get through membranes that can be disrupted with your hands. And then now you see two things. that had been one thing before you stuck your hand in there. And your hand turned it into two things, or your scalpel turned it into two things. One thing is now two things. And you realize, oh, I did that. It's not two things. It's one thing. I made it two things. It's only one thing. Every time I touch my scalpel or move my hand, I'm taking one thing and turning it into many things. That's a spiritual movement, because you realize it started out as one thing and you turned it into many things, but it's actually one thing. So the place where you come back to is oneness, is unity, is continuity. And when you realize that the relationships within the body can sometimes be very subtle, and it's like, oh, there's just this very subtle diaphanous membrane between this and that.
Very fluid.
And yeah, or even just a fluid, but the fluid is a thing that's continuous with all the other things, right? And then, so it's moving. There's movement in there along planes of differential movement, and yet it's a subtle connection. And that made me reflect on my world, because it's like, okay, if for years I missed these subtle connections, or we failed to account for these subtle connections, maybe there are more subtle connections that we haven't accounted for. Maybe between you and me, there are subtle connections, right? Maybe the space between us isn't empty. Maybe it's full. And I just haven't paid attention carefully enough to the texture of what is between us that unites us rather than separates us. And so you start to consider, if you just consider that we may all be connected in ways that at first we think are subtle, but then we realize they're not subtle at all, actually. So to me, the subtle connections in the body are no longer subtle. They're totally obvious and ridiculous, and I can't imagine how we've ever not acknowledged them. And so similarly, if we start to negotiate a conversation about the textures that we've formed between us, and if you say something mean to me, right, and I'm going to feel that, if you're intending to be hurtful, it might be a joke and we'll all laugh together, and that's one thing. And it's another thing, if we say something to hurt one another, it changes the texture of the relationship. It can become brittle and broken even. It can become torn. And yet the connection is still there. It just becomes a painful one rather than a yummy one, like you like to say. So how that yumminess or that painfulness, those are indicators. We can feel the subtle textures between us very clearly. And if we had eyes for it, we could see it too. There are clairvoyants who just look at that. You can just see there's a rope going from my solar plexus to your solar plexus. It's made out of light, and it doesn't feel good because it's like a stealing is happening at the gut, and it doesn't feel good. It's a cord that could be cut, right? Not to say the connection would be gone away, but its quality would be changed from an insidious one to maybe a gentler one, etc. So to me, I got that all from looking at the body, and just extrapolating from within to what's around me.
You had a lot of points that I appreciate on, and I will admit that I would love to have a different session with you that has nothing to do, I mean, it has everything to do with the energy centers, and that's it. Because the 5-year study that you did on energy healing is what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
But that is not today.
Okay, we'll wait.
But yes, that conversation I'm looking forward to. So moving on, and I'm not going to care how long we run here. I said an hour, but I've got about 4 more questions, so we're just going to continue if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. So how is your passion for understanding inner beingness influenced how you live, and how does it continue to fuel your dedication to anatomy?
Hmm. Well, I see anatomy as a great as a as a avenue to teach about connection, uh, because we've all got a body on this planet. That's like rule number one for being on this planet. You're going to wear a body, and yet we all get all bent out about this and that, and we learn this teaching or that teaching, and this get educated in this way or that, have this religion and that, and get on a big fight about everything and then hate on each other. And we divide, right? We divide based on very superficial things often. Your hair is this way, you have a tattoo, blah, blah, blah. And we divide or connect based on these very superficial things. But to me, the body is kind of a pretty deep experience for all of us. I mean, none of us are going to get away with the trials and tribulations of bodily life and its pleasures as well. And so I feel like when I talk about the body in the most basic way, conveying the most basic things, like here's what this thing looks like in this person, and here's what it looks like in this one over here. How cool is that, right? Oh, two livers, they're a little different. Oh, kind of like our faces are a little different. And realize that our uniqueness, right, is for real. Like, in other words, we really are unique iterations of the human form. And so we become a mirror of uniqueness to each other. That's the potential, right? We can, in holding with esteem and precious reverence the uniqueness of that anatomy that we're studying, and going, wow, like standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. And then you're standing there doing that with a bunch of other people. And you're having this shared experience of going, wow, and feeling awe at the uniqueness of the donor on the table there. Well, it's kind of hard not to turn that onto each other, right? And then you start to look at each other like, oh, she's doing her thing there, isn't she? Oh, he's rolling it out his way. And that's the only way we can do it. That's the only option, is to take your unique version of it and live it out. And you can either see that as exciting and something that inspires you to do your thing your way, right? Rather than being jealous or at odds with people or thinking, well, why am I not doing it his way? It's like, well, he's got his body over there. That's not my body. I got nothing to do with it. I don't know how to make that one work. I don't know what it's like to live in that one. It might be really hard for me. I might not be able to handle that. Like, and then suddenly you can have admiration. Like, oh, that person's body is a little tricky in a way that I think is really kind of intimidating. Like, I don't think I sort of feel a little lucky now. I didn't always feel lucky about my body, but now I feel like, wow, I got a pass there, because my challenges are different, right? So
I like that. It's very freeing, right?
yeah,
It's very
exactly.
freeing.
Very freeing. Yeah,
It's very
people often
freeing.
walk away from the study of the body from an integral perspective, feeling both some joy for the gift that they have in their body and
Right.
some added respect and reverence for other people's bodies, and some sense of freedom that I don't have to do it that way. That's kind of a relief. I got my gifts here and I'm going to work with what's in my Christmas basket.
Exactly. Exactly. What's something surprising that you've discovered through your explorations that others wouldn't expect?
Something surprising?
Well,
Oh
I
my
think I could
gosh.
probably answer it.
Yeah,
Not
do it
mine.
for me. I want to hear what
Yeah.
you got.
Well, it was a response to this question, but also what you were saying earlier is that when Gil was showing us the donors and the different bodies, all of them are different.
Yeah.
Like if he showed us a section of the body, it would be different in another donor. And he would
Yes.
show us that exact picture and the exact nerve, the exact blood vessel, like everything. It should be here technically, but in this body, it's over here, right? And we don't know why, but we can appreciate what Gil was just saying. It's different, right? It's unique. And I love that. I
Oh,
can
great.
appreciate that.
And
So,
that's the starting point of integral anatomy, is to witness what's actually there rather than to project on what's there an idea from a book that is actually a drawing of no body. It's just a made up thing in the book there. So why would you expect that to find that in your body? But that's the surprise, because we generally start with the books before we get a chance to see inside the body. But it's very disorienting if you're thinking that book is going to be on the table there. It's not. I'll tell you one of the most surprising experiences that I had in my whole dissection life was the very first donor that I worked on with that medical school friend when we went into the medical laboratory and we opened up the chest. And I was in shock. It was empty. In other words, there was lungs there, and there was this heart thing in the middle, but I thought there was going to be like a soul in there or something. I don't know what I thought. I don't know what I thought, but I was like, I feel like this soul in me, and it's not there when I'm looking at it. There was a shocking disjunction between death and life, between personhood and a dead body. There's this vast difference between the living and the dead. Not to say that dead body didn't represent a life, wasn't an intimate diary of the person that expressed through it. And yet it was just this empty shell. It was a husk. And that shocked the heck out of me. And never did find the soul in the body. It turns out it can leave, and this room is empty now, and that was very, very profound.
I bet it was, especially it being the very first one. You don't.
Yeah, I was just a kid. I was whatever, 25 years old or something.
Yeah. Okay, so how has exploring the body in such depth brought you personal freedom?
Well, for my person, the freedom comes because that exploration of the body represents me doing my thing, right? In other words, it might not give someone else freedom because it might not be their thing. But for me, this exploration, I mean, you were at the nerve tour. Tell me, was I doing my thing? Right?
Yes.
Right? That's me doing my thing. Right? The thing I showed you was me doing my thing, and showing you was also me doing my thing. So those are the things that I came here to do, apparently. Like, in other words, I'm not wondering, like, what am I going to be when I grow up, right? So I'm following my passion, and part of that passion is to share what I learn along the way. And so, and I am deeply passionate about what I do. I can't tell you why. When I was a little boy, I didn't imagine I would grow up and be someone who teaches about the human body through dissection. And yet here I'm doing it, and I'm not wondering, like, what am I going to be when I grow up? So that's kind of profound and freeing, although I can definitely take it deeper, right? So I'm not done. And so I have excitement for what's still to come, and I know that, and you might not believe me if I say it, because you said I've studied so deeply, but I really feel like I've just scratched the surface. I mean, it's like the universe, right? It's a way of entering into the universe, and the universe is big, and it's inside of you. And so, people think the universe is outside of them, but it's actually inside. and it's accessible, and the exploration is if you go deep inside, you're going to bump into astronauts. That's all I can tell you.
All right. We're gonna wrap it up here soon. Um, Walk the listeners through, like, as if no one has ever seen your library, right? They've never seen your page, they've never seen your videos on YouTube. Walk a
Uh-huh.
listener through your library and your
Ah,
suggestions, like where they should start.
yeah, sure. Well, by my library, Tess is talking about my online library, as
Yes.
opposed, I think, to the bookshelf in my room here.
No,
And so I have what I call
thank you.
my inner space library is a feature of my website. And you access it through membership, and it comes in two forms: a free version of it and a paid version of it, although the paid version of it is very reasonably priced. And the free inner space library has several large video courses that really represent the whole learning curve of my career. There's about 20 hours of video content there that basically brings you into the story of the body from an integral perspective. So I have a video series that I did called the Integral Anatomy Series. It's about 8 hours of content, and that is there. And then I did a tour talk that I traveled with, the Integral Anatomy Intensive, and I filmed it. And it was a way of bringing people into the story of integral anatomy a little differently than the dissection lab one, where I'm dissecting on camera and talking and taking you through the body. So this one is a slideshow, and it's a little more culturally involved. It's a little more expansive, the Integral Anatomy series. And then I did another tour called the What's the Fuzz Tour Talk. This one is about 4 hours long, and it's an exploration of the different types of fascia, their movement properties, and the implications for health. So those three stories combine to form the Easy Rider membership, the free membership on my site. And then all of that content is also in my paid membership, but with the ability to get credit for it with a variety of institutions that certify people in different professions. But that's just the snippet. That's the tip of the iceberg, because I have another 300 hours of content in the Explorer membership that it pokes at the idea of integral anatomy from every direction possible. So there's a 200-hour course called Anatomy from A to Z that features Anna and Z, two wonderful donors, and I dissected them on camera comparatively for 17 months, and we shot 1,200 videos comparing these two bodies. And if you can walk away from that and still think the bodies are the same, I can't help you. But when you do dive into Anna and Z, you could literally drop in anywhere, but you could start at the beginning and go to the end, and you would literally have the experience of a tour through their bodies from skin to toe bones, like down to the most intimate details of their body, in a way that makes a deep, deep, deep impression on you of how we're put together and how differently we're put together and how amazingly we're put together and what it's like to fall in love with learning anatomy. But I also have in that Explorer membership all of the PDFs of all the books I've written, a number of books, as well as a monthly talk that I give for 4 years now with various professionals. It's called Live with Gil. So it's like a podcast, but the participants can ask questions and such at the end of our for initial discussion. So I have 4 years of conversations with people up there. And then I have various presentations that I've given around the world for different conferences and such that have been recorded and are included there too. It just goes on and on, basically. And so I created it as like a sustaining professional resource for hands-on professionals, so that you could have this thing that you could go to that would be teaching you anatomy the way you understand the body, rather than borrowing or stealing it from regional anatomy. I'm trying to offer integral anatomy as a resource for people who are professionals in fields that have a holistic perspective and ought to have their own anatomy too. So basically, that's that world. That's what's in that library there, and it's a whole lot of me doing a whole lot of talking with a whole lot of cadavers. Oh, there's also two laboratory live streams that document two courses that I did during in 2020, where literally thousands of people came and watched these dissections as I did them and toured them on these bodies. So those are about, I don't know, 12, 15 hours each or something like that. I'm not sure, but it all adds up to over 300 hours of content there. So either way, if you want to dip in, free or paid, either way, it's a pretty significant way to support your own way of seeing the body and your own way of touching and transforming your touch. Actually, watching these videos will transform your touch, will transform your movement, and that's the feedback that I get.
Yes. Yoga professionals, massage therapists, what other professions can get continuing ed?
Yeah, yoga, Pilates, massage, structural integrators. Some of our courses are approved in various states with PTs and OTs, and it's a big project to get approvals. So Rachel, my partner in all things, Rachel Scott, who you mentioned at the beginning, is my education director, and she gets the courses submitted to various agencies and such. But there's 50 states and 100 different professions who might be interested in this. So we don't cover them all in terms of continuing education credits. We do cover a bunch.
Good, yeah, a good amount.
Yeah, a pretty good amount, and we're always growing that,
Okay, so the two questions that you were so excited for, 3 book recommendations for the listeners.
3 book recommendations. Let me think. I had actually scratched something down when I opened that email. I was like, oh, shoot. There are things that if you wanted to, like, people will say, Gil, I'm trying to prep for class. What's one book I should read about the body? Job's Body. That would be an amazingly worthwhile recommendation by Dean Juhan. Dean is a Traeger practitioner. He was 17 years at Esalen doing massage. He's an amazing teacher and a brilliant author. He's actually going to be on my guest in March on Live with Gil. So Dean Juhan's book, Job's Body, is a beautiful, beautiful introduction to the body. And then there's other books that are not, let me think, an anatomy book that I've really enjoyed when I was starting out it's called The Color Atlas of Anatomy. And a color atlas is not the coloring book, not the coloring book. That's a horrible nightmare to spend hours and hours bent over a book with colored pencils. Now, this is a color anatomy, an atlas is an atlas of dissections, right? And they're so well done. And the authors are Rowan, R-O-H-E-N, Rowan and Yokochi, Y-O-K-O-C-H-I, Rowan and Yokochi. And I've always loved that book. I don't look at it much anymore because I'm in the lab, right? But before I was in the lab, I couldn't stop looking at that book. I thought, wow, could I ever do dissections as amazing as these dissections? And
all right, what's the name of your book? Remind me.
My book? Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of books. The poetry book that I read from.
So that's coming next. Let's not talk about poetry.
Oh, okay. We're not going to talk about that. So.
But you have an anatomy book that you wrote, right?
No, I didn't write an anatomy book. I'm working on the Atlas of Integral Anatomy, but I have not published that yet. In fact, I was working on the Atlas of Integral Anatomy when I started the A to Z project, and then it got derailed. So I just basically my magnum opus is the visuals on my website. But there are books that I want to write that I haven't written yet. I've written maybe 6 or 7 books, but none of them are an anatomy book because it's a project so big in my mind. I don't know if I'll be able to squeeze it all into this lifetime.
Okay, so let's talk about the poetry books because I own 2 of them.
Oh, do you? So you're an early adapter because what do you have?
Oh gosh, I knew you were going to ask me that. They're at
Well,
home,
that's okay.
and I'm
The
in Texas.
seeming space is the one that I brought
Yeah.
around. Well, that book is actually all 3 of my poetry books combined. So my first poetry book was called Coming into Form, and I don't sell it anymore because it's now included in the third one. My second one was called Beyond the Leaving, and the third one was called The Seeming Space. And when I was about to publish The Seeming Space as a third book, I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to have to lug 3 books around. I'll just turn it all into one book. And so I basically took out the blank pages and the large type and the pictures from the prior 2 books and jammed 3 books worth of poetry into this little Seeming Space book, which is easier to carry around when you're traveling. So
Right.
so the Seeming Space is my poetry collection, and it just kind of, I don't know where that came from. It came from heaven or from my heart basically, and I just had to write those poems down. So there they are.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
Friends that are yoga teachers, or Pilates instructors or whatever it is that you do and that you
Mm-hmm.
listen to this podcast, I read them in class. I write themes around them. Maybe I'll just take like one line of them that they are beautiful lines of poetry conveying the intimacy of our bodies. It's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Thank you.
I had
Thank
no
you.
idea that you wrote poetry until I came to the Nerve Tour, so I'm glad that I went, right? So, okay, so if you had a superpower, what would it be?
If I had a superpower, I do have a superpower,
Ooh,
but I
tough.
didn't. It's not like a superpower that I wished I had. It's just I have a superpower. Do you want to know what it is?
I do.
I mean, many of us have superpowers, but we don't realize they're superpowers because it's just the way it is for us. So I have the superpower of the ability to not smell.
How do you do that?
It's a superpower. Superpowers just occur. So I I can smell, and I can smell very acutely, but I can also not smell. And this is a superpower. Trust me, when you work in a laboratory and I'm literally like slogging through piles of poop and stomach contents and rotting tissue. Sorry, folks, to be super blunt, but dissection isn't always pretty, you know. And
Right.
so I worked on the back of garbage trucks as a kid, and I worked in a laboratory in college where I had to take autoclave maggots out of test tubes. And I've dealt with some really nasty smells in my life. And somewhere along the line, I I could not smell if I chose not to. Or I don't even have to think about it. I just don't smell if I don't want to. And that's my superpower. And it
So
is a
you can be
very
artistic for not
handy
smelling.
one. It's a very handy one for me.
Yes. Well, yeah. You don't, I mean, I wouldn't even, until you started getting to where you were going, I was like, oh, yeah, the laugh. That makes sense. But I didn't think about that. Yeah. So. Well, Gil, I could ask you a million more questions, but my time's up, so I'm going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening. I cannot say thank you so much for spending time with a stranger that you barely know. Um,
My
yeah,
pleasure. My pleasure. I appreciate your interest, and I hope the listeners enjoy this and uh, and uh, and have a
yeah,
wonderful evening.
yeah. Thanks, Gil.
You bet.
Bye.
Good night.